the technical services catalog is really not of interest to the business and is typically not viewable by the business. But it's important for IT to understand how those technical services and systems support the business services. Some of the additional services in service design, additional processes in service design include the 4 listed on this page, and they are often discussed together. Continuity, or IT service continuity management, is associated primarily with disaster recovery planning. The reason why it's underpinned by the other 3, capacity, availability, and security are managed on a day-to-day basis, whereas continuity is managed over longer time frames. So if we're talking about disaster recovery, we're talking about those types of failures or interruptions that are more widespread or have a higher level impact. In continuity management, it's important that we design a system or process for restoring services after an unexpected outage. It includes focus on testing of the continuity plan, and one of the most important things to identify in continuity management is what the triggers will be. So if you have a significant weather event, who decides when the continuity plan is going to be put into effect? And that's identifying the trigger for the continuity plan in continuity management. I mentioned that the other 3 processes are managed on a day-to-day basis. Those other 3 processes are capacity, availability, and security management. Capacity management has 3 components or 3 parts to it. You can see this often or identify this as a triangle. So at the bottom level you have several components or items within the IT infrastructure. We measure and manage capacity at that level. We then can build up upon component capacity to identify service capacity. So for, again, going back to the example of a patient records management system, the capacity for that whole overall system or service is defined by the limits of capacity on the components that support it. So we're defined by the availability of or capacity of the applications and database components. And then finally, at the business level, a business capacity is measured by the services that contribute to the overall business. So for a clinician or somebody who's patient-facing within an organization, their service or their business would be defined by or limited by the services that they depend on. Likewise, for somebody in the finance department, the business capacity for a finance individual would be defined by the services on which they rely. So everything else could be running great, but if there is inadequate capacity on even something like email, that will impact the ability for that particular individual to conduct their day-to-day business. Capacity and availability are often discussed together. Capacity, of course, as the name implies, relates to the bandwidth, storage, or other type of capacity of an IT service. Availability relates to basically the uptime or conversely the downtime of a specific service. And like capacity, the availability for a specific service or an overall business can be and will be impacted by the availability of the components that underpin that service. In availability management, we focus on downtime. We also want to understand maintenance windows and hours of support for our customer. I mentioned that we would talk a lot about meeting the needs of the business. So if I am a business that runs Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, then as long as my service is available during those hours, then I can be said to have 100% availability, even if I have a lot of downtime or maintenance windows outside of those business hours. And it's important to spell out the hours of expected availability when you're talking about expectations of the customer and specifically about service level agreements. Availability targets are often part of service level agreements. The final component or process here is security management. We work with a lot of customers in the Washington, D.C. area, and security, of course, is important to most organizations, but especially important to a lot of government organizations. Security is made up of 3 components. Often I find that when I teach these classes for ITIL Foundation, it's easy to remember because the abbreviation or acronym is CIA, which stands here for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is to protect it from those who shouldn't see it. Availability is the flip side. It's making it available to those who should see the data. And then, excuse me, integrity, which is making sure that the data itself is accurate and is not compromised. Excuse me. Some of the additional principles in ITIL service design. We have been talking about aligning the IT design with the needs of the business. That is the whole concept of business service management. We're really moving beyond alignment even into integration with the business. We want to be a partner with the business and have a seat at the table when decisions are made. When we're looking at the design of a service, we need to keep in mind efficiency and effectiveness. And again, according to the limits of the organization and the needs of the business. As much as possible, we want to be focused on service-oriented architecture. We want services that are self-contained, that can be shared, that can be easily packaged, and that are reusable. So we want to apply standards to the organization as much as possible. Then finally, when we are designing a service, it's important that an organization has defined service design models. So there is going to be an expectation of a delivery model and sourcing options. Some of us may have heard of sourcing options such as Cloud First. That's an initiative to move as many services as possible to the cloud. And we also want to standardize our design and development options and approaches. ITIL doesn't make any specific recommendations in this area, but there are many complementary types of approaches, and it's recommended that that be standardized within the organization to make it easy and repeatable. The output, as I mentioned before, of the service design phase should be the service design package, which will then be handed off for implementation through service transition. The service design package has several components. It should have gathered the business requirements from the service strategy phase. It incorporates that with the service design itself, along with the readiness assessment and a lifecycle plan. The lifecycle plan should include things like the transition plan. In service transition, if you were present at one of the previous webinars, you'll remember that includes release management and specifically testing and training. And then overall operational acceptance. So we talk a lot in IT about going through user acceptance testing. So we should have a plan for that coming out of the service design phase.